I pulled off the deserted lane and parked under the skeletal frame of Blackmoor Keep, the sun sinking behind churning gray clouds. The castle loomed, half consumed by ivy, its stone walls stained by centuries of rain and secrets. A heavy cold pressed against my skin, like the place was inhaling every breath I took. A wooden sign, half-rotted and lopsided, read, "Blackmoor Keep, Private Estate. No, beware, no, keep out." Just a quiet emptiness that felt like a warning. I had come here to write, to escape the grind of the city, to feel something primal that only a place this old could offer. I carried a notebook, a camera, and a single night's worth of supplies, planning to stay just long enough to catch the atmosphere, take some photos, and write the opening chapter of my new novel. But the castle offered more than inspiration. It demanded my attention. As I stepped toward the arched entrance, the wind rattled the broken shutters, stirring whispers from the battlements above. Moss covered the cracked stone, and each footstep echoed across the courtyard like a slow tolling bell. I circled the walls, tracing carved gargoyles and shielded niches worn smooth by weather. Petals of wild black roses, long extinct in cultivation, dotted the grounds like bruises. Inside, the maze of corridors stretched endless. Archways leading to empty halls, cold hearths, and spiral staircases winding into shadow. I climbed, breath cold in my lungs, until I reached the top floor. The library. Shelves bowed under the weight of mold-crumbling tomes, leather cracked and pages stained. A desk held an open ledger, ink unreadable, age blurred it into blots. A single candle, dropped and melted on the desk, winked in a draft. I picked it up. The flame fluttered, then steadied, casting my own face into the wavy mirror behind it. I wasn't being watched. Or was I? Night came with no warning. One moment, dusky golden light, the next, thick darkness pressing in. The candle guttered. A cold draft brushed past. I froze, notebook clutched, urging my heart to stop hammering. A distant creak, wood shifting, stone sighing. I lit a second candle at the mantel. The room felt smaller now, cramped by shadows that flickered and lunged. Behind me, a soft scratch. Then from above, a thump, stones falling. No, footsteps. Barefoot. I didn't turn. Instead I whispered into the darkness, "Hello." Silence. Then I felt it, eyes behind me. I looked. No one. Just the candlelit stacks. But behind them, branches clawed at broken windows. At that moment, I realized I wasn't alone. Sleep was out of the question. I stayed awake, watching the library shadows as echoes drifted in through cracks. Whispers. Indistinct, but unmistakable. I thought I heard my name in the hush of Old English. I found myself answering back, "Who's there?" Even though I had no right to speak to silence. The once welcoming glow of the candle turned hostile. It cast shapes in the walls, cavern mouths, endless tunnels, ragged silhouettes with hooded heads sloping low. At one point, a shadow peeled away and drifted toward me, a woman in 1,000 layers of black lace, face pale and eyes hidden. She walked and stopped inches from me, lips moving silently. I felt dread coil in my chest, then the candle flared, and she vanished. Only the radiating chill told me she'd even stood at my shoulder. In the morning, if you could call the gray, dim light morning, I wandered lower, through damp stone halls until I found heavy oak doors. Behind them, a ruined chapel. Ceiling frescoes half dissolved, carved pews cracked as if trampled by unseen crowds. At the altar, a basin filled with stagnant water, black oil rising to the surface. The graffiti on the walls startled me, "Here walks the lost bride," again and again, overlapping, later scrawled out, rewritten, the names bleeding into each other with age. Later, I found a portrait hidden in the vestry, an elegant woman in Victorian lace. A phantom image, eyes like twilight wells, skeletal hands gripping the frame from Baroque corners. Night came, and I slept on the altar steps, bathed in moonlight. Dreamless. Silent. Until the basin overflowed of its own accord, and my sleep ended in a gasp as cold liquid hit my face. When dawn came, it found me kneeling, hands wet on the stone floor. The water stain leading from the basin down the chapel steps. I followed it. It led outside to the graveyard, rows of headstones, mossy and tilting, unmarked graves under old yew trees. One stone was fresh, Eleanor Blackmoor, run 1892, now. Eleanor. I remembered the gown in the portrait. Her name whispered in the chapel night. Did I wake her? As I stepped through, I realized I could no longer leave. The storm rolled in behind me. Rain fell in curtains, wind licked the stones like a living thing. Rain hammered around me, clouding vision and blurring shapes into smears of gray rock and dripping ivy. Yet the small stone-etched Eleanor Blackmoor glowed under a shaft of pale morning light, frost forming at its base despite the season. I pressed a gloved hand to the cold marble, half expecting her ghost to emerge, calling my name. I walked among the tombstones, trying to steady my terror. The air smelled of damp earth and old rot, an antiseptic sweetness that clung to dead stones. The cracked paths beneath my feet were hidden in moss, each footstep muted and hollow. As I circled the graveyard, I fell into a trance-like pattern: tomb, empty space, fresh grave, black roses tangled in the grass, Eleanor's stone. Then I noticed footprints in the mud, barefoot, small. They led from Eleanor's plot toward the west wing of the castle. My heart thudded. I followed, even though every instinct screamed not to. The west wing had collapsed decades ago, the locals warned of ruined floors and hidden voids. But the footprints were there, inching into darkness. The ruins stood like a broken promise. An entire corner of the castle crumbled inward after a long-ago fire. Bricks lay scattered, rafters teetered, and the smell of char was thick. Even daylight failed to warm this corner. Inside, molded wallpaper peeled from walls in curling sheets, revealing blackened stone. The footprints ended by a stone doorway with a jagged opening, partially blocked by fallen timbers. I climbed over the debris and squeezed through. The small room beyond was empty, but for a mirror hanging crooked on the far wall. Its glass was cracked, spiderwebbed across the surface. When I leaned in, I barely recognized myself, eyes red-rimmed, streaked with rain, skin slick with cold moisture. But behind my reflection, I saw movement, a figure stepping forward, wearing a dress that matched Eleanor's in the portrait. She stepped toward the mirror, face pressed inches from my own. And then she smiled, broad and impossibly wide. The mirror shattered with a crack so loud my ears rang. The shards fell at my feet, glittering like black diamonds. But she was gone. I backed out of the wing, heart hammering. The rain had turned to a fine drizzle, muffling distant sounds. As I moved through the courtyard, I realized footprints now followed mine, barefoot, small, dripping water into the puddles I'd stepped through. They paused just outside the library door. Inside, the candlelight flickered even though no drafts disturbed it. I blinked, the place looked untouched since last night. My notebook sat open, pen resting across a page I didn't remember writing. Find the altar. Ask her forgiveness. Someone, or something, had written in my hand. My hands shook as I pocketed the notebook. I moved toward the chapel, the fresh graves receding behind me. The rain eased, but each step was heavy with growing dread. Inside the keep's main hall, I paused under a shattered chandelier. Rain leaked through missing roof tiles, scattering silver drops across checkered stone. A smell reached me, sweet and cloying, like rotting sugar. And I coughed, trying to clear the stench. Then footsteps behind me. Soft. Intentional. I twirled, the flashlight illuminating garden gnomes posed in lifelike arrangement, leering, chipped, mocking me. My breath sped. I backed away, and the flashlight beam landed on a single red rose placed at the base of the staircase, freshly cut, petals wet with rain. None grew on the grounds. I descended the main staircase, drawn toward hidden corridors. The walls narrowed, and the scent of old stone grew stronger. I passed beneath vaulted arches, entered a room that smelled of cold linen and sorrow. A grand portrait hung there, Lady Blackmoor again, eyes faintly moving, head tilting as if she tracked me. I heard her whisper, "Leave." My blood ran cold. The grand piano in the corner began to play itself, a soft waltz in a minor key, out of tune. Keys depressed as if by invisible fingers. My flashlight shook. Music bounced through the hall, growing louder until the final note was struck, and then silence. My heartbeat hammered. I didn't wait. I fled. I returned to the chapel, but the basin was empty, no oil or water pooling at the altar. Instead, the dais was slick with fresh blood. A slow drip echoed in the silence. As twilight descended, I realized I was surrounded. Candlelight flickered in every window of the keep, though I hadn't lit them. The shadows lengthened inside the stone. I felt prickle of terror, of unseen eyes studying my every move. Alone, but not alone. A whisper rose from the stones, "You asked for a story. Now become part of it." Moonlight slithered through the shattered windows of the chapel, pooling onto the blood-streaked dais. Each droplet on the stone altar glinted like a dying star. The basin was dry, its bottom muddled with rust-red stains. Behind me, the soft thrum of a distant bell. Not an ordinary bell, but a sound that shivered the marrow in my bones. I crawled forward, breath shallow. At the edge of the dais, I found 3 objects laid out in deliberate order, a tarnished key, a black rose, and a fragment of cracked mirror, curved, smooth, beckoning. Beneath the altar's edge, carved faintly into stone, was a name, Eleanor. My skin prickled, and I lifted the fragment. Briefly, I saw Eleanor's face, pale and vacant, then flickered to my own reflection covered in grime and fear. I dropped it, and the fragment spun, clattering as a gust extinguished the candle at the altar's edge. The chapel fell silent. But for a faint breath behind me. I spun, empty pews. Then a shape took form, a figure in Victorian lace, stepping out of shadow like a pale spectre. Her eyes were dark pits, her lips curved in mournful apology. I could sense her sorrow, centuries old. "You disturbed the rest," she whispered. Gooseflesh erupted on my arms. She straightened, face distant. "She demands the key." She pointed at the tarnished metal. The key glowed faintly. A tether to something buried under the keep. I realized I was standing at the heart of the curse. I left the chapel with the key tight in my fist, pursuing the echoing bell's toll. Each ring warped the corridor's walls, reshaping stone behind me so that stairs spiraled where hallways had stood. The path descended, behind a hidden door in the north wall beneath the library. Dust swirled as I slid the key into the lock, turning it with a reluctant click. A heavy door swung open to reveal narrow stone steps, fading into darkness. Candles revealed a steep, winding passage twisting into the bowels of the keep. Every step echoed. The air tasted of earth and time. Mottled stones and roots jutted from the walls. At intervals along the descent, I found tokens embedded in crevices. Fresh wildflowers crushed into petals, wilted by candle flame. After nearly 50 stairs, I emerged into a vaulted cavern. The bell's toll was deafening here, vibrations pulsed through the vaulted ceiling. In the cavern center was an ancient well carved from black sandstone, its depths devouring the lantern light. Around the well lay sightless sacrificial figures kneeling on stone slabs, heads bowed. Their garments, tunics and dresses from eras past, were frozen in time like tomb relics. The key burned in my palm, responding to the cavern's sinister rhythm. The bell tolled 13 times. On the 13th, a voice drifted from the well's belly, clear, feminine, broken. "Help me." I knelt at the edge, plunging a trembling hand inside. The water was nutrient-thick, black sap floated atop. My fingertips touched something living, slippery, warm. A girl's hand closed around mine. Her grip was desperate. My breath caught as I saw fingers as pale as bone. "Eleanor." The grip tightened. "Please," I hesitated. The cursed bell bang pressed through me, the toll demanding blood. I shouldn't, yet I reached in and pulled. She rose, mud-slicked hair, a dress heavy with sludge and shale. Her face was ravaged by centuries, cheekbones sharp, lips cracked, throat half-healed writhing wounds. I staggered back. The cavern stank of earth and resurrection. She smiled, eyes empty and vast. "You freed me." I wanted to flee, but the bell tolled again. Something sealed behind me. The cavern's entrance collapsed in a roar of falling stone. I was trapped. Eleanor stood beside the well, silent accusation in her posture. The vision of her, alive again, made my heart lurch. She lifted a finger, pointing at the waiting sacrificial slabs, then at me. A harsh truth burned behind her hollow gaze: the restoration required sacrifice. I backed away from the altar. "No," I whispered. The cavern stilled. Darkness thickened. Then, through the collapsing cavern's dust, I heard footsteps. No, many footsteps. The villagers. The others who came for the ritual. But this cavern had sealed them out. A flicker of hope. Eleanor moved closer, tendons beneath her skin tauting in hunger. "You must replace me," she said softly. "Only one may bear the curse." The bell tolled again, 9 times this time, a heartbeat pulse. The sacrificial slabs glowed faintly, dust lifting in little eddies. The air vibrated. I realized the truth: the keep would never allow its heart to stop. It needed fuel. It needed human purpose to flow upward, to the stones, to the disguised idols in the chapel and halls. I looked at her, at the silence and the sealed cavern, at my knife strapped to my belt, and understood. The keep demanded, "Choose." I knelt beside her, tears brimming. "I won't," but the thick black water licked at her ankles. As I watched, it rose. She stood until liquid coated her waist. "Cross here," she said. She didn't step backward, just stood there. The words were pained. Breathy. Long centuries of grief coiled in them. I felt the key's warmth by my palm again. It hummed. I placed it in the recessed slot on the stone well. The well shuddered and gurgled, a stone hatch slid open at its base. I balked. Eleanor drifted forward and disappeared into the well water. I wanted to reach for her but could not move. Then, she screamed. A terrible fractal scream, echoing off the stone and rattling my bones. I snapped forward, driving the key downward, locking it. The cavern went silent. Her scream cut off. The water stilled. Her body lifted, dripping, broken, and floated to the center. The hatch slid shut. Eleanor was gone again, but this time, quiet, stitched to the well forever. The bell above stilled. Silence descended. The return from the cavern was strange, almost reverent. The bell's toll had finally ceased, replaced by a quiet so absolute it pressed against my eardrums like a tomb. The keep seemed to hold its breath, waiting. I emerged into the crumbling corridor, hands stained with black sap and tears. I paused as I passed the chapel's threshold. The altar was dry now, no basin, no bloodstains, naked stone under flickering candlelight. I didn't dare look at the altar's edge, for fear of finding her body flattened into the stone. The stones of the chapel floor seemed quieter, as though relieved that the presence had been expelled. Somewhere in the distance, a door creaked closed, whispering wood against wood. My body shook. My throat was raw from how much I'd screamed without making a sound. I turned away and stumbled toward the main hall, determined to leave, to never return. The stones felt solid beneath my feet, but the keep wasn't done with me yet. The main hall was dark and empty, but carefully arranged paintings of Lady and Lord Blackmoor watched me as I passed. I noticed Lord Blackmoor's portrait bore a new addition, Eleanor's face, faintly superimposed over his, eyes vacant, mouth a horrid grimace. My heart seized. Paint dripped from the basilisk-eyed image, pooling into dark rivulets on the wood-paneled wall. I reached out to wipe it, but the paint resisted, slipping away like oil. A soft creak behind me made me spin, no one. But along the wall, portraits shifted. The figures blurred, heads tilted toward me, lips moving in silent warning. I fled toward the library, the echo of hurried footfalls chasing me. The candles I'd left burning there were burned down to stubs, but the great bookcases still towered above me, shadows pooling between their ribs of wood, alive. In the west corner, I discovered a hidden panel I hadn't noticed before, ancient iron hinges near the ceiling. I found a step stool, pulled it forward, and forced the panel. It swung inward, revealing a narrow spiral stair made of cold stone. I climbed upward into the highest tower chamber, the inverted library. No shelves here, just glass cases attached upside down to the ceiling, containing artifacts, pressed flowers, stones, shards of mirror, pieces of bone. Each drifted, suspended as if defying gravity. At the center, a desk stood on the ground, with an open family Bible laid out. Pages turned slowly, unaided, to the Old Testament story of Abraham and Isaac. But Isaac's face bore Eleanor's features, and as I watched, the page's illustration changed to show an altar made of Blackmoor stone, a priest raising a knife above Abraham's head. The knife dropped. Blood oozed from the drawn altar, dripping onto Eleanor's face. I stumbled back, head spinning. The glass cases above rattled, petals and dust drifted down, landing like silent tears onto the floor. Lightning flickered through the tiny tower window. With each flash, I saw movement within the keep, silhouettes at shutters, shadows shifting without owners, stairs opening into endless black. An urgent buzz rattled my spine. As I watched, I realized it was coming from the tower walls themselves. I placed my hand on the rough, damp stone and felt a tingling warmth moving inside the rock. The rune-carved devices beneath the altar were now throbbing with slow pulses. The keep's heart beating again, still alive, still connected. I realized, with horror, that regardless of Eleanor's sacrifice, the keep was awakening entirely, and the presence had extended beyond her. I fled the tower via a narrow staircase I hadn't noticed before. The steps delivered me to the underground crypt below the main keep. Here, skeletons lined the walls, jutting from niches, arranged like guardians. The air was heady with dust, bones, and dried earth. Each skeleton wore a rose at its throat, black and shriveled. The floor was littered with thin petals, washed beneath unseen weeping. In the center was an altar table carved from black rock, its surface etched with Enochian runes. I recognized the mark, the same twist of lines on the well, the stones, my own skin. A sound, something slithering across stone. I spun, but saw no movement. The bone chandeliers above rattled, as though inhaling and exhaling. A single rib detached itself from the wall's skeleton and drifted across the floor, rolling eerily to stop at my boot. I froze. Then the chanting began, distant, wordless, a congregation of whispers chanting my name, the keep claiming me more fully than Eleanor ever was. At the furthest end of the crypt, a vault door barred further descent. Its surface was carved with overlapping images, the crucified figure of a woman, a key dripping with blood, Blackmoor Keep's shape outlined in flame. The door's surface glowed with brittle red lines. The key slipped from my pocket and pressed itself into the carved outline, a perfect fit. The door swung open. Beyond lay a darkness darker than night. I hesitated, my mind screaming to run, yet my body stepped forward. Through the threshold, the air turned cold again, bitingly cold. I walked into a corridor lit by ghost fog, an inverted reflection of the keep above, empty of walls, only stone arches floating in white mist. Whispers lashed out in full clarity, "Claim us, claim us, finish the work." My knees trembled, but I kept going. Because there was no escape, not until this place was finished with me or I with it. The corridor ahead stretched into mist, arches suspended in a shifting white sea of fog. My breath became visible in the cold air, each exhale a fleeting wisp. The distant chanting echoed again, an insistent murmur that filled me with dread. At the end of the corridor was a spiral staircase descending deeper still, hewn into the rock and slick with dampness. The chanting grew louder, more human. My heart pounded. This was no longer echoes of the past but a living, present ritual somewhere below. Though every instinct screamed to run, I descended. Each step sank me deeper into darkness, the oppressive cold so dense I thought I might suffocate. At the bottom, a vaulted chamber opened before me, a hidden cathedral of stone. Torches burned in sconces along the walls, their flames twisted unnaturally to one side, as though bending away from something at the center. The smell of iron was so strong I tasted it. In the center lay an altar carved from black basalt. At its heart lay a woman's corpse. Terribly preserved, skin like parchment, eyes gone, but still, remarkably intact. A crown of black roses lay across her clavicle, petals stained dark as onyx, almost wet with something thick and slow. Around the altar knelt faceless figures, hooded in black. They chanted in unison, voices low and hollow, blood for stone, flesh for vow, keepers of the name, sealing the brow. The verses wrapped around me like living chains. I didn't hesitate. I strode forward, knife drawn. Her voice slipped into my mind as the figure drifted closer. The ground beneath her feet began to crack, spreading fractures outward. Black roots wormed up, twisting across the floor, fueling the rosebush. It pulsed with light, thorns dripping with viscous dark sap, as though the flower bled its heart into the keep's core. The hush broke, the whispers fell silent. All that remained was the labored beating of my heart. Eleanor raised her hand, and the rosebush quivered. Thorns snapped off, revolving through the air before sinking into my flesh, tiny pricks that burned sharply, tracking down my arms and spreading into my veins. Memories flooded me, the stories I'd read, the legends I'd mocked, now grafted onto my bones. I saw the keep's founding, love, betrayal, sacrifice. A bride laid to rest in granite, a groom's sorrow leaking blood onto the stone. A covenant written in pain and petals. But the rosebush, Eleanor's last piece of sacred grief, was the cipher. I realized then that she had become the bloom, and the bloom the keep's seal. With each thorn I received, sentiments took shape in my mind, Eleanor's shame and self-judgment, a vow born of sorrow. Her life and death replayed like a looped hymn in my brain, marriage corrupted by her own longing, an unholy bargain to preserve her love, the unseen betrayal, and her body laid forever within stone. I felt her sorrow infecting me. Each heartbeat became hers, each breath hers, until my own identity drowned under centuries of lament. I fell to one knee, clutching the rose sap dripping from my wounds. Ivy grew along my arms, black petals sprouted across my chest, and my mouth tasted the cold iron of ancient vows. She knelt too and brushed my cheek with the ghost of her fingertips. "You carry more than my name," she whispered. "You carry my truth." From the base of the rosebush grew a sprig. Tendrils extending toward me, soaked in sap and blood. Lack of oxygen rooted me to the spot. The ghost fog coalesced around us. I could hear Eleanor's final heartbeat, exaggerated and deliberate. With her consent or not, a root snaked around my wrist, pulling me forward. A terrible communion began as the rosebush fed through my veins, its lifeblood entering my heart. My vision blurred, then cleared, with a clarity harsher than any daylight. I saw the faces of those lost to the keep. A foxhound abandoned to die in the yard, a nursemaid buried inside its wall, Eleanor's husband slumping by candlelight, broken. The keep remembered them all. I vomited black blossom petals that fell in a silent rain. The rosebushes glow dimmed, slowed, and then collapsed. Its branches snapped and crumbled into dust. The sanctuary rocked. A terrible groan, a buried voice, echoed, cycle complete. Eleanor's ghost dissipated. No tantrum, no promise whispered, only a sigh carried in the shifting fog. The roots retreated beneath the stone floor, the black petals receded, and the chamber that had been vibrant with ethereal gore returned to lifeless contours. The keep exhaled. Not peace, but waiting. I fell into the thick slush of fog, eyelids closing even as I struggled to stay conscious. I heard the stone above me groan, the first hint of future dawn. Hands lifted me by root-thin wrists, dry, human hands. Marcus's face swam into view, streaked with tears. "You ended it," he whispered. I tried to answer, felt my mouth filling with dust, my body landing in his arms, soft. When I awoke, I lay near the graveyard, shrouded in moss and dew. The rosebushes remains among fallen petals. The sun was rising. No fog approached. The keep stood silent, though its stones quivered like mute breaths. My wounds were shallow, healed. The mark on my hand was gone. A faint scar remained, thin and bone-white. I staggered home, muttering apologies to the sleeping ground. At the village edge, I found Marcus waiting, his eyes heavy with unshed grief. He led me to the road and offered his hand. "You can leave," he said simply. "But never come back." I nodded, voice gone, stepping away from Blackmoor Keep. It faded behind me like smoke. Back in my flat, I tried to write. The words dripped bloody across the page. But I found they told the same story every night, the keep's echoes haunting every paragraph. I dream of bells, of Eleanor's soft lament, of the rosebush burning in my veins. Sometimes I wake and water splashes at my feet, though no basin lies beneath. I still hear the bell toll, when storms strike, when wind rattles the glass, when I trace my fingers where root thorns dug into flesh. I feel the keep's hunger for stories left untold, for blood shared, for secrets buried. They say some captive spirits pass on, their curses lifted. Eleanor rests now in peace, or so the keep's silence claims. But I feel her presence every time I pass a black rose on a headstone, every time I hear a bell when dusk falls. I wonder if I inherited her purpose, to guard the boundary between love and sacrifice, between sacred grief and the darkness that feasts on it. I wrote it all down, carved it into the pages, hoping the words would contain the keep's hunger. Maybe someday someone will read it and see not a horror story, but a dirge of love and loss. They say some captive spirits pass on, their curses lifted. Eleanor rests now in peace, or so the keep's silence claims. But I feel her presence every time I pass a black rose on a headstone, every time I hear a bell when dusk falls. I wonder if I inherited her purpose, to guard the boundary between love and sacrifice, between sacred grief and the darkness that feasts on it. I wrote it all down, carved it into the pages, hoping the words would contain the keep's hunger. Maybe someday someone will read it and see not a horror story, but a dirge of love and loss. The road back to town was a narrow ribbon slicing through misty fields. I drove in silence, my hands shaking on the wheel, the rising sun turning the horizon to bruised gold. Thoughts tumbled inside me, questions with no answers, a weight in my chest like a stone. At home, I locked the door behind me and stood in the hallway, chest tight. No footsteps echoed, no whisper breathed. But in the hush, I heard a faint toll, like a distant bell, half heard and half remembered. That night, every candle bleed its light into trembling shadows. I curled on the couch, memories flooding, the altar's cold stone, Eleanor's faded lips, the suffocated moan of centuries. Sleep finally claimed me, but not before a single, breathless whisper, "Watch the stones." Days passed, color returning to the sky, but my dreams fetched only darkness. I'd wake at 3, covered in sweat, convinced I heard the keep's bell toll just outside my window. The town accepted my absence as a traveling scholar's whim, but I never left my flat. I avoided the road leading to the keep. I couldn't bear to look at it again. Still, in the gutters, I found a black rose feathered with dew. Each day, a new one. Always fresh. Always placed by unseen hands. I wrapped them in tissue and hid them, but they never wilted. I tried to research. Blackmoor's archives delivered nothing new, just coded references and missing pages. Old Mary's obituary read, died 1947, cause unknown, buried alongside her sister. No mention of a tomb or stones, though locally she'd warned me. Late one evening, I reread my notes. Candlelight flickered shadows, one stretched too long. I glanced up, the room felt slippery, as if moving under the light. A wind gusted, though no window opened. A bell tolled inside my skull. Driven, I didn't know why, I drove to the outskirts of town and stood beneath the full moon at the hill where the keep still rumored to stand. Once, before the seal, I'd have seen ruins. Now, under moonlight, I saw walls rising like waking giants, stones bristling with ivy and resolve. A pale glow seeped from a single window above, high in what used to be the tower. A haunting invitation. I fought it. But a soft whisper slid in, "Watch the stones." And so I watched, and realized I wasn't seeing ruins, but the keep fully whole, embedded in the night, ageless, despite the centuries. A week later, at 3 in the morning, the bell inside my head tolled again, 6 sharp strokes, echoing through the floorboards. I bolted upright, blanket tangled, heart thrashing. Beyond the window, I saw shapes drifting low through the yard. Black roses crawled along the fence, their petals parted to show tiny, silent mouths. I felt curdling fear. I lifted my phone toward the window, but it was gone, no fence, no shadows. Just moonlight and the empty street. Only a single rose petal lay on the sill, fresh. I crushed it underfoot, but the stain soaked into the wood. Sleep abandoned me again. By nightfall, the aroma of earth and stone seeped through my walls. A choked moan echoed in the hallway. A breathing wall, alive with suppressing memories. I followed the sound to the living room mirror. My reflection stared blankly, then Eleanor appeared beside me, lips moving. "Find the altar. Seal the lid. Watch the stones. Let the blood return." The mirror cracked with a single web. I stumbled back. My heart raced. I couldn't live this way. The keep had bound itself to me. I gathered a bag, a camera, knife, journal, and drove. Behind the ruin, I found the chapel intact. Under moonlight, an unbroken structure. The basin glowed faintly as though alive. I touched the stone, it shivered like wounded flesh. I knelt and pressed my blood-scarred hand on the altar. The basin overflowed with black sap and petals, but the stone held firm. Above, batteries of stone idols stirred, eyes cracked to life. The basilisk statues dripped petrified tears. I pressed my forehead to the stone and closed my eyes. Whispered echoes, sealed, unfinished, guardians. I understood. I wasn't just keeper, I was warden. The seal stable, but only while I lived, and only while I honored its memory. At dawn, the chapel door stood shut behind me as I exited into the pale morning. I turned once, the keep's silhouette framed by shattered trees. Black roses lined the path, erect and blooming. I swore the oath, to watch the stones, to guard the seal, to answer the toll in my head, to hold the darkness at bay. My notebook grew silent. I no longer wrote fictional realism. I wrote prophecies. If you read this, know that some places choose you, and never let go. Blackmoor Keep will whisper across miles, finding me across roads and time. The rose breathes, the bell tolls, the stone grieves. I do not shrink from it, I hold it close. Every midnight, a single bell tolls inside me, call to duty. I rise. I guard. I watch. For the dead. For the living. For the damned. And I know, the keep watches back.